She still remembered the exact moment she realized her marriage was ending, even though she didn't know it yet. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, and Suzanne Hurst was standing in the kitchen of the house her parents had built 30 years ago, chopping vegetables for dinner. Brandon, her husband of 8 years, sat at the kitchen table with his phone, and she watched him smile at the screen in a way he hadn't smiled at her in months. It wasn't the smile itself that struck her. It was the softness in his eyes, the way his shoulders relaxed, the subtle way he angled the phone away when he sensed her looking. That smile belonged to someone else now. Suzanne was 38 years old, with long dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and a face that had learned to hide worry behind practiced composure. She had worked her way up to marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company, a position that demanded confidence and clarity. At work, she made decisions that affected millions of dollars in budget. At home, she was increasingly unsure of everything. The knife slipped slightly in her hand. She set it down carefully on the cutting board and wiped her palms on a kitchen towel. Her mother's old kitchen towel, worn soft from decades of use, with faded yellow flowers embroidered along the edges. "Who are you texting?" Brandon looked up, and for just a fraction of a second, she saw something flicker across his face. Guilt? Annoyance? It vanished so quickly she almost thought she'd imagined it. "Just someone from work," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "Christy needs me to cover an extra shift next week, trying to work out the details." Christy, his manager. Suzanne had heard that name dozens of times over the past year. "Christy approved my vacation request. Christy wants to reorganize the sales floor. Christy thinks I should apply for the senior associate position." Always casual, always professional, never with any particular emphasis that would make Suzanne think twice about who this woman was. "On a Tuesday night?" Suzanne asked, keeping her tone light, not accusatory. She'd learned that accusations killed conversations, pushed him further into whatever distance he was already creating between them. "Seems late for scheduling." "Yeah, well, retail doesn't sleep." He stood up, slipping the phone into his pocket with a smooth, practiced motion. "I'm gonna take a shower." He walked past her without touching her. No hand on her shoulder, no kiss on the cheek, no casual brush of fingers against her arm. None of the unconscious physical intimacy that used to be as natural as breathing. He moved through the kitchen like she was furniture, something to navigate around rather than connect with. She listened to his footsteps on the stairs, heard the bathroom door close, heard the water start running. She stood there alone in the kitchen her parents had remodeled 15 years ago, staring at the half-chopped vegetables, suddenly unable to remember why she was making dinner at all. That was 3 months ago, the beginning of the end, though she hadn't known it then. Since that September evening, the distance between them had grown from a crack to a chasm, widening incrementally every single day, until Suzanne felt like she was living with a stranger who happened to know where the coffee mugs were kept. The changes were gradual enough that she could almost convince herself she was imagining things, but they were undeniable enough that she lay awake most nights staring at the ceiling, listening to Brandon breathe beside her, wondering when exactly her husband had stopped being her husband. He came home later from work, always with plausible excuses that arrived smooth and rehearsed. "Manager asked me to help set up the holiday displays. Had to train the new guy on closing procedures. Corporate team meeting ran long." Each excuse was reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern she couldn't ignore. One evening in October, Suzanne had driven past the department store at 9:30 at night. Brandon's car was still in the employee lot. She'd circled the block twice, telling herself she was being paranoid, that he was probably inside doing exactly what he'd said he'd be doing. But when she drove past a third time, she saw him, walking to his car with a woman, talking, laughing. The woman touched his arm, and he didn't pull away. Suzanne had driven home with her hands shaking on the steering wheel, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might be sick. When he'd gotten home an hour later, she'd asked casually, "How was the closing shift?" "Long," he'd said, heading straight for the bedroom. Exhausted, going to bed. No mention of the woman. No mention of the conversation in the parking lot. No mention of anything that would explain why he'd lied about when he'd left work. He spent more time on his phone, always tilting it away, always putting it face down when she entered the room, always taking calls in another room, his voice dropping to a murmur she couldn't quite hear through the walls. When it buzzed during dinner, he would glance at it, and that same soft smile would cross his face, the one that used to be for her, before he'd excuse himself to respond real quick. Their conversations became performances, hollow exchanges that hit all the required notes without any actual music. How was work? Fine. Yours? Fine. What do you want for dinner? Doesn't matter. Okay. That was the extent of most evenings. The easy flow of shared thoughts, the comfortable silence, the small observations about their days, all of it had been replaced by careful choreography, designed to avoid any real connection. Intimacy had evaporated entirely. The last time they'd made love was over 4 months ago, in early August, and it had felt mechanical, obligatory. Like he was going through motions on some mental checklist of husbandly duties, his mind clearly somewhere else, even while his body went through familiar patterns. Since then, nothing. He stayed up late watching television in the living room. He woke up early and left for work before she came downstairs. He claimed exhaustion, stress, a pulled muscle in his back that made everything uncomfortable. Always something. Always an excuse that was just plausible enough that she couldn't challenge it without sounding paranoid or needy. Suzanne tried talking to him, multiple times. Each attempt felt like throwing words into a void and hearing nothing echo back. "Brandon, I feel like we're disconnected. Can we talk about what's going on?" He would shrug without looking up from his phone. "I'm just tired from work. It's busy season. You're overthinking things." "I'm not overthinking. You're barely here even when you're home. When did we stop talking to each other? We're talking right now." His tone was flat, bored, like she was a customer service complaint he had to process. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me what's wrong. I want you to tell me why you feel so far away." "Nothing's wrong. I'm just stressed. Can we not do this right now?" And that would be the end of it. He'd leave the room, or turn back to his phone, or suddenly remember something he needed to do. The conversation would die before it ever really started, leaving Suzanne standing there with words stuck in her throat and no idea how to make him hear them. But she wasn't overthinking. She knew her husband, or she had known him once, back when they'd met 10 years ago at a friend's barbecue, back when he'd made her laugh so hard she'd snorted beer out her nose, and instead of being embarrassed, he'd laughed even harder. Back when they'd stayed up all night talking on her apartment balcony, watching the sun rise while sharing dreams and fears and terrible childhood stories. Back when he'd proposed on the beach, where they'd had their first real date, getting down on one knee in the sand while tourists applauded, and Suzanne cried happy tears. They'd gotten married 8 years ago in a small ceremony at a botanical garden. Her parents had been there, beaming with pride. Her father had walked her down the aisle. Her mother had cried through the entire ceremony and blamed it on allergies, even though everyone knew better. Brandon had looked at her like she was the only person in the world, had said his vows with a voice that shook with emotion, had kissed her in front of everyone like it was a promise he intended to keep forever. They'd rented a small apartment together after the wedding. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. 2 bedrooms, outdated kitchen, a balcony barely big enough for 2 chairs. They'd been happy there. At least she thought they had been. They'd hosted friends for game nights. They'd cooked together on weekends. They'd made plans for the future, talking about buying a house someday, having kids, growing old together in some vague, distant future that felt safe and certain. Then, 5 years ago, everything changed. Suzanne's parents had gone on a weekend getaway to the mountains. A second honeymoon, her mother had called it, though they'd never really stopped acting like newlyweds. They'd been driving back on a Sunday afternoon when a semi-truck lost control on a rain-slicked highway and crossed the median. The police said they'd died instantly, together. No pain, no fear, just a sudden, violent end to two lives that had been lived fully and loved deeply. Suzanne had gotten the call at work. A state trooper, his voice professional but kind, telling her there'd been an accident, that her parents were gone, that she needed to come to the hospital to identify the bodies, even though identification was just a formality. She'd driven there in a fog, Brandon beside her, his hand on her knee, his voice saying things she couldn't process through the roaring in her ears. The grief had been overwhelming, all-consuming. For weeks, Suzanne couldn't function, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything except cry and stare at walls and wonder how the world could possibly keep turning when her parents were gone. Brandon had been there then, really there. He'd held her through the nights when she woke up sobbing. He'd made sure she ate something, even if it was just toast and tea. He'd handled the funeral arrangements when she couldn't bear to make decisions about caskets and flowers and burial plots. He'd been the husband she needed, solid and present and caring. Her parents had left her the house. This house, the one they'd built in the early 90s with their own savings, choosing every detail carefully. The house where Suzanne had grown up, where she'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where she'd had her first kiss on the front porch at 16, where every room held memories layered so thick she could hardly breathe sometimes under the weight of them. The house was paid off completely. No mortgage, no liens, just property taxes and maintenance and memories. In the will, it was hers, only hers. They'd been specific about that. To our daughter, Suzanne Marie Hurst, we leave our home and all its contents. May it shelter her as it sheltered us. Suzanne and Brandon had moved in 6 months after the funeral, once she could finally bear to sort through her parents' belongings. They'd packed up their apartment, said goodbye to that chapter of their lives, and settled into the house that was so much bigger and so much emptier than anywhere they'd lived before. Brandon had been supportive, patient. He'd helped her box up her parents' clothes for donation. He'd held her when she broke down sorting through photo albums. He'd painted the guest room a neutral color and helped her turn her childhood bedroom into a home office. For a while, things had been good. They'd made the house theirs while still honoring her parents' memory. They'd hosted Thanksgiving. They'd put up a Christmas tree in the living room where her parents used to put theirs. They'd talked about maybe having children someday, filling these rooms with new life and laughter. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. Suzanne couldn't pinpoint exactly when. Maybe it was gradual, so slow she didn't notice until the change was complete. Or maybe there was a specific moment, a specific choice Brandon had made, and she'd just missed it entirely. Either way, by this September, by that Tuesday night, when she'd watched him smile at his phone like it held secrets he'd never share with her, the man she'd married was already gone. Now, 3 months later in early December, Suzanne moved through this house like a ghost haunting her own life. She touched walls her father had painted. She cooked in the kitchen where her mother had taught her to make pie crust. She slept in the bedroom she'd shared with Brandon, feeling the cold distance between them even in sleep, knowing something terrible was coming, but unable to stop it. The house, which should have been her sanctuary, felt like a museum of broken promises. Every corner held a memory of what they used to be. The couch where they'd watched entire television series wrapped in the same blanket, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. The kitchen table where they'd played cards on Sunday mornings, laughing over ridiculous hands and terrible bluffs. The front porch where he'd kissed her goodbye every morning before work. A ritual so automatic neither of them thought about it until suddenly it stopped. She walked through rooms in the evenings after work, straightening pictures that didn't need straightening, wiping dust from surfaces that weren't dusty, trying to hold on to something that was slipping through her fingers like water. She knew something terrible was coming, She could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon, dark clouds gathering, air pressure dropping, that electrical charge that meant lightning was about to strike. On a cold Thursday evening in early December, Suzanne came home from work around 6:30. She'd stayed late for a budget review meeting that had run long, and traffic had been heavier than usual. The December cold bit through her coat as she walked from the car to the front door. Inside, the house was warm. Lights on in the living room. Brandon's car in the driveway, which surprised her. He'd been coming home later, and later recently, rarely before 8. She opened the front door and stepped into the entryway, set her purse down on the table her mother had refinished years ago, started to take off her coat. That's when she saw him. Brandon was sitting in the living room armchair, her father's old chair, still wearing his work clothes, a button-down shirt with the store logo, dark pants, his work badge still clipped to his belt, but he wasn't on his phone, wasn't watching television, just sitting there with his hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing, posture rigid and determined, like he was waiting for something, like he was waiting for her. Suzanne's heart started pounding before he even said a word. Her fingers froze on the buttons of her coat. Every instinct in her body was screaming that this was it. This was the moment. The storm was here. "We need to talk." His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was about to discuss what to have for dinner, not destroy someone's entire world. She felt her purse slip from her fingers, heard it hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. Her coat slid off her arm. She left both where they fell and walked slowly into the living room, her legs trembling beneath her throat tight, her chest constricting like someone was pulling strings around her ribcage. "Okay." The word came out, barely above a whisper. Her own voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. He didn't stand up, didn't move, just looked at her with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition, no trace of the man who had promised to love her forever. Eyes that were already gone, even though his body was still sitting in her father's chair in her parents' house. "I want a divorce." The words landed like a physical blow. Suzanne actually felt her body sway, felt her vision blur at the edges, felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her feet. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the old clock her father had hung on the wall decades ago. Tick, 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 each second a small eternity. What? It was all she could manage. One word, a question that encompassed everything and nothing. "I want a divorce." He repeated it in the exact same tone, cold, rehearsed, like he'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror until he could deliver it without flinching. "I'm not happy. Haven't been for a long time." The world stopped. Everything stopped. Suzanne's mind was racing, trying to catch up, trying to make sense of what was happening. "A long time? What do you mean a long time? Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't we talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about." His voice was ice. No emotion, no conflict, just cold, empty determination. "I've made my decision." She felt her knees buckle and reached for the back of the couch to steady herself. Her hand found the fabric, gripped it so hard her knuckles turned white. 8 years. They had been married for 8 years. Together for 10. A decade of her life. A decade of shared history. Of building something she thought was solid, permanent, real. And he was ending it like it meant nothing. Like she meant nothing. "Brandon, please." Her voice broke. Tears were already forming, hot and fast, blurring her vision. "We can work on this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. We can go to therapy. We can—" "No." He cut her off without even looking at her directly. His eyes were focused somewhere past her shoulder, like he couldn't even bear to make eye contact while he destroyed her. "I don't want to fix it. I don't want therapy. I want out." The tears started streaming down her face. She couldn't control them, couldn't stop them. 8 years. Her parents had loved him, had welcomed him into their family. He'd stood beside her at their funeral. He'd helped her pack up their belongings. He'd lived in their house for 5 years, and now he was throwing all of it away, like it meant nothing. Why? She was shaking now, her whole body trembling. Just tell me why. What happened? What did I do? It's not about you. He finally stood up, and for one brief, desperate second, she thought maybe he was going to come to her, hold her, tell her this was all a terrible mistake. But he didn't move toward her, just stood there, shoulders straight, jaw set, every line of his body language screaming that he'd already left, even though he was still standing in the room. It's about me. I don't want this anymore. Don't want what? Our marriage? Me? The words came out choked, broken between sobs. You don't want me anymore? I don't want this life. Suzanne wiped at her face with shaking hands, trying to compose herself, trying to find some solid ground in this nightmare. Is there someone else? The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't answer, didn't deny it, just stood there, and that silence told her everything she needed to know. Everything she'd suspected for months, everything she'd tried to convince herself she was imagining. It was all true. Oh my God. Fresh tears spilled over. Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. There is someone else. Who is it? How long? That doesn't matter. It matters to me. She was shouting now, past dignity, past composure. After 8 years, after everything, you owe me the truth. Who is it? He walked toward the stairs, and that's when she saw it. A suitcase, sitting by the banister, already packed. He'd done this while she was at work, packed his things, planned his exit, timed it perfectly so he could deliver his speech and leave, clean and quick, without having to deal with the messy aftermath. You can't just leave like this, she said, following him. Her voice was desperate now, pleading. We have to talk. We have to figure things out. The house, our finances, everything. My lawyer will be in touch. He picked up the suitcase. The handle extended with a metallic click that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet house. Your lawyer? The betrayal cut deeper. You already have a lawyer? How long have you been planning this? He didn't answer, just headed for the door. Brandon, please. She was sobbing openly now, all pretense of control abandoned. Please don't do this. We can work it out. Whatever I did wrong, I can fix it. We can fix this together. Please just talk to me. He opened the front door. Cold December air rushed in, bringing with it the smell of snow and the distant sound of traffic. He turned to look at her one last time, and she searched his face desperately for any sign of the man she'd loved, any crack in this cold stranger's armor, any hint that part of him still cared, still remembered, still felt something for the woman he'd promised to love forever. There was nothing. His eyes were empty, dead, like he'd already severed every emotional connection and was just waiting for his body to catch up. Goodbye, Suzanne. He walked out and pulled the door closed behind him. She heard his footsteps on the porch, heard them on the walkway, heard his suitcase wheels rolling across concrete, heard his car door open and close, heard the engine start. Suzanne stood frozen in the entryway, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. She heard his car back out of the driveway, heard it drive down the street, heard the sound fade into the distance until there was nothing left but silence. And then she was alone, completely, devastatingly alone in the house her parents had built, surrounded by 8 years of memories that now felt like lies. Her legs gave out. She slid down the wall to the floor, pulled her knees to her chest, and let the grief consume her. She cried until her throat was raw, until her chest ached, until there were no tears left, just dry, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. The clock kept ticking. The house settled around her with familiar creaks and sighs, and Suzanne Hurst sat on the cold hardwood floor of her childhood home, trying to understand how her entire life had just walked out the door without ever really saying goodbye. The first night was endless. Suzanne eventually pulled herself up from the floor, her body stiff and aching from sitting in one position for so long. She wandered through the house like a ghost, touching things without seeing them, moving from room to room without purpose. Her mind kept replaying the conversation on an endless loop. "I want a divorce. There's nothing to talk about. My lawyer will be in touch." Each phrase a knife blade turning in her chest. She ended up in the bedroom they'd shared for 5 years, the room that had been her childhood bedroom before her parents died. She'd repainted it when they moved in, covering the pale pink of her teenage years with a soft gray. Brandon had helped her choose the color. They'd painted together on a Saturday afternoon, getting more paint on each other than on the walls, laughing until they couldn't breathe. Now she stood in the doorway staring at the half-empty closet. He'd taken everything. Every shirt, every pair of shoes, every piece of clothing that had hung next to hers. All that remained were empty hangers and the faint outline of dust where his things used to be. She couldn't sleep in that bed. The thought of lying there alone, in the space they'd shared, where he'd slept beside her while planning his exit, was unbearable. Instead, she went to the guest room, climbed under the covers fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn broke through the curtains. Her mind wouldn't stop. Questions circled endlessly, each one more painful than the last. Who was she? How long had it been going on? Where did they meet? Had he loved this other woman while he was still lying next to Suzanne every night? Had he thought about her while Suzanne talked about her day? While she made dinner? While she still believed they had a future together? The not knowing was torture. The silence he'd left behind was louder than any confession could have been. When morning finally came, pale winter light filtering through thin curtains, Suzanne felt hollowed out, empty. She picked up her phone with shaking hands and called her assistant at work. "Jennifer, it's Suzanne." Her voice was hoarse, barely recognizable even to herself. "I need to take a sick day. Maybe 2. Something came up." "Of course. Is everything okay?" "No. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again." "Yes. Just need to handle some personal things. I'll be back Monday." She ended the call before Jennifer could ask more questions, set the phone on the nightstand and stared at it. Should she call someone? Her sister in California? But what would she even say? How did you explain that your husband had just walked out with no warning, no real explanation, leaving you to piece together the wreckage alone? Suzanne spent Friday in a fog. She moved through the house doing nothing and everything, started laundry and forgot about it in the washing machine, made coffee and left it untouched on the counter until it grew cold, opened the refrigerator, stared at its contents for 5 minutes, then closed it again without taking anything. She tried to eat a piece of toast and couldn't get past 2 bites before nausea forced her to throw it away. By Saturday morning, the shock was starting to wear off, replaced by something sharper, anger mixed with anguish, questions that demanded answers. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Brandon's contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. What would she even say? Would he answer? Would he give her the explanations he'd refused to give 2 nights ago? Or would he just let it ring? Or worse, answer and repeat the same cold, rehearsed lines that had already destroyed her? She set the phone down without calling. She wouldn't beg, wouldn't give him the satisfaction of her desperation. The questions remained, eating at her, refusing to be silenced. Sunday afternoon, Suzanne finally managed to shower. The hot water felt foreign on her skin, like her body belonged to someone else. She got dressed in clean clothes, forced herself to eat half a sandwich, and sat at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand. She thought about Bethany, the colleague 2 offices down who'd been through a divorce 7 years ago and had somehow come out the other side stronger. They weren't close friends exactly, but they'd had enough coffee breaks and honest conversations that Suzanne trusted her. She pulled up Bethany's contact and hit call before she could talk herself out of it. "Hey, Suzanne. What's up?" Suzanne opened her mouth to say she was fine, to deflect, to protect herself the way she'd always done. But instead, Everything came pouring out in a rush of words and fresh tears. Brandon left Thursday night. He asked for a divorce, just walked out. I don't know what to do. There was a brief pause. Then Bethany's voice came through, steady and sure. I'm coming over. Text me your address. You don't have to. Address. Now. 25 minutes later, Bethany was sitting across from Suzanne at the kitchen table, listening without interruption as the whole story spilled out. The months of distance. The phone he guarded like it held nuclear codes. The late nights at work. The coldness. The refusal to explain. The suitcase already packed. When Suzanne finally finished, emptied of words, Bethany leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. Okay. First of all, I'm so sorry. This is terrible, and you didn't deserve it. She reached across the table and took Suzanne's hand. But second, and I need you to really hear this, men don't leave like that unless there's someone else already waiting. Suzanne nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue. I asked him. He didn't deny it. Of course he didn't. Because there is. Bethany's voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. The way he did this? Cold, planned, lawyer already hired? He's been checked out for months. Probably longer. And I'd bet everything I own he's been with someone else this whole time. I know. Suzanne's voice was barely a whisper. I know that. But he won't tell me who, or how long, or anything. And not knowing is killing me. Bethany squeezed her hand. Then find out. How? Hire a private investigator. Suzanne looked up, surprised. A private investigator? That seems so dramatic or practical. Bethany pulled out her phone. Look, you have every right to know what happened to your own marriage. You need closure. You need to understand so you can move forward. And honestly, you might need evidence for divorce proceedings. If he's been having an affair, that matters. Legally and emotionally. She scrolled through her contacts and turned her phone around to show Suzanne a name and number. Thomas Webb. I used him during my divorce. He was professional, discreet, and fast. Found everything I needed to know in less than 2 weeks. Suzanne stared at the contact information. Part of her recoiled from the idea. Hiring someone to follow her husband felt like something from a television drama. Not real life, but another part of her, the part that had been screaming for answers since Thursday night, knew Bethany was right. What did you find out? Suzanne asked quietly. When you hired someone for your divorce, Bethany's expression shifted, something dark passing through her eyes. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. Jake was having an affair with someone from his gym. Had been for 8 months. She paused, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. When I got the investigator's report, I sat in my car for 2 hours just staring at the photos. I had proof of everything. Dates, times, hotel receipts, text messages. What did you do with it? I spent 2 weeks planning his destruction. Bethany's voice was flat, emotionless. Every detail. I was going to send everything to his boss, to his family, to our mutual friends. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what he'd done. I had the emails drafted, the envelopes addressed. Did you send them? Bethany shook her head slowly. No. I sat there one night with my finger hovering over the send button, and I realized something. He didn't deserve that much of my energy. All that rage, all that planning, all those hours obsessing over how to hurt him back. It wasn't hurting him. It was destroying me. She looked directly at Suzanne. So I just walked away, took my evidence to my lawyer, filed for divorce, and moved on with my life. Do you regret it? Every day. Bethany smiled sadly. But not because I didn't destroy him. I regret wasting 2 weeks obsessing over revenge instead of healing. Those 2 weeks I spent plotting, that was time I'll never get back. Time I could have been taking care of myself instead of feeding hatred. Suzanne absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. But you said I should hire an investigator. For information, for closure, for legal protection. Bethany squeezed her hand again. Not for revenge. There's a difference. Get the answers you need. understand what happened. Then decide what kind of person you want to be on the other side of this nightmare. They sat together for another hour, Bethany sharing practical advice about lawyers and finances and self-care. When she finally left, Suzanne felt marginally steadier, like someone had thrown her a rope while she was drowning, and she'd managed to grab hold. That night, Suzanne lay in the guest room bed, with Thomas Webb's contact information glowing on her phone screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button for what felt like hours. This was it, the moment of decision. Did she want to know? Did she want to transform her suspicions into confirmed facts? She thought about Bethany's words, "Get the answers you need." She thought about the questions that were eating her alive, the not knowing that was somehow worse than any truth could be. At 10:30, she set the phone down without calling. Tomorrow. She'd call tomorrow. For tonight, she just needed to get through the darkness and into morning. Monday arrived cold and gray. Suzanne forced herself to get up, to shower, to get dressed in actual clothes instead of the sweatpants she'd been living in. She made coffee and managed to drink half a cup. Small victories. At 10 o'clock, before she could talk herself out of it, she picked up her phone and dialed Thomas Webb's number. He answered on the second ring. Webb Investigations. His voice was calm, professional. The voice of someone who'd heard every variation of human disaster and wasn't fazed by any of it. Suzanne took a deep breath. "My name is Suzanne Hurst. Bethany Chen referred me. I need help." "Of course, Mrs. Hurst. Tell me what's going on." She told him the basics, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Husband asked for divorce out of nowhere. Suspected affair, refusing to provide information. As she spoke, she realized she was already getting better at telling the story. The raw edges were starting to scab over, at least enough that she could talk about it without completely falling apart. Thomas asked questions, methodical, precise. Brandon's full name, his workplace and position, the name of his manager. "Christy," she said, suddenly remembering all those casual mentions over the past year. His vehicle make and model, license plate number, his typical schedule. "How long will this take?" Suzanne asked when he'd finished gathering information. "Usually 1 to 2 weeks for a case like this. I'll conduct surveillance, document his movements, identify who he's spending time with. If there's another person involved, and from what you're describing, I'd say it's highly likely, I'll find them. And then? Then I provide you with a comprehensive report. Photos, timeline, locations, identification of any third party. Everything you need to understand what happened, and everything your attorney needs for divorce proceedings." Her attorney. She didn't have an attorney yet. That would be the next step. One thing at a time. "How much?" He gave her the figure. It wasn't cheap, but she had her own income, her own savings. The house was hers with no mortgage. She could afford the truth. "When can you start?" "I can start today if you complete the intake paperwork. I'll email you a contract and detailed questionnaire. Once I receive those and the retainer payment, I'm on the case." They finalized the logistics. After they hung up, Suzanne sat staring at her phone for a long moment. She'd done it, set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. In a week or two, she'd know everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every detail of how her marriage had really died. Part of her felt empowered. She was taking action, reclaiming some small measure of control in a situation where she'd had none. Part of her felt sick, knowing that what she'd learned would hurt worse than the not knowing. But she'd made her choice. She opened her laptop and found the email from Thomas Webb already waiting. She filled out the questionnaire methodically. Brandon Michael Hurst, age 40. Sales associate at Harrington's department store for 12 years. His direct supervisor, Christy Randall, regional manager. Vehicle, silver Honda Accord. Usual work schedule, varies, typically 10 to 6 or noon to 8. She typed it all out, every detail she could remember about his routines and patterns. Then she transferred the retainer payment and hit send. By early afternoon, Thomas Webb confirmed receipt. Beginning surveillance today. I'll contact you in 1 week unless I discover something significant sooner." It was done. Suzanne closed her laptop and looked around the kitchen. Her mother's kitchen, with the cabinets her father had installed himself, and the tile backsplash her mother had chosen from dozens of samples. The house felt different now. Not haunted, exactly, but charged, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She spent the rest of Monday cleaning. She needed to move, needed to do something with her hands, needed to feel some sense of control over something. She started with the bedroom, stripping the sheets she couldn't sleep on anymore, washing them on the hottest setting, remaking the bed with fresh linens that had never touched his skin. Then she went through what little he'd left behind. A few random items in drawers he must have overlooked in his rush to pack. An old baseball cap, some loose change, a book he'd never finished reading, toiletries in the bathroom he'd deemed not worth taking. She packed everything methodically into a cardboard box, her movements mechanical and efficient. No tears now, just cold determination. She carried the box down to the basement and set it with the other storage items, out of sight. Eventually, she'd figure out how to return his things, but not now. For now, she just needed them gone from her immediate environment. By evening, the bedroom felt marginally more like hers. She'd moved furniture slightly, rearranged items on the dresser, changed the energy of the space even if just incrementally. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small reclamation of territory. That night, Suzanne did something she hadn't done since Thursday. She slept in the master bedroom. She lay in the freshly made bed, staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of the empty space beside her. She woke up several times, reaching across the bed in half-sleep before remembering there was no one there. But by morning, she'd made it through the night. Progress, however small. Tuesday brought a return to work. Suzanne couldn't hide forever. And honestly, going through the motions of her job sounded easier than spending another day alone with her thoughts. She got dressed in a navy suit that made her look more professional than she felt, applied makeup carefully to hide the evidence of crying, and drove to the office. People noticed. Of course they did. Her eyes were still slightly swollen despite her best efforts with concealer. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but her co-workers were kind enough not to press. A few asked if she was feeling better. She'd called in sick Friday, and she gave vague answers about a stomach bug. Bethany stopped by during lunch with a container of homemade soup. "Chicken and rice," she said, setting it on Suzanne's desk. "Comfort food. Don't argue, just eat it." "Thank you." Suzanne's throat tightened with gratitude. "For everything. For coming over. For listening. For the investigator referral. Did you call him?" "Yesterday morning. He started surveillance already." Bethany nodded approvingly. "Good. Now you just wait. Focus on work. Take care of yourself. Let him do his job." The days that followed, blurred together. Wake up. Work. Come home. Avoid thinking about what Thomas Webb might be discovering. Fail to avoid thinking about it. Sleep fitfully. Repeat. Wednesday. Thursday. Friday. Each day she got marginally better at functioning. She ate regular meals, forcing food down even when she wasn't hungry. She participated in work meetings, her professional mask firmly in place. She even managed to laugh at a colleague's joke, though the sound felt foreign coming from her throat. The weekend was harder. Too much empty time. Too many quiet hours alone in the house. Suzanne tried to stay busy. She went grocery shopping, though everything in the store reminded her of meals she used to cook for two. She attempted to watch a movie, but couldn't focus. She considered calling her sister, but still couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. Sunday afternoon, she found herself in her parents' old bedroom. She'd kept it mostly unchanged after they died, unable to pack up their belongings, unable to erase the last physical traces of their presence. Now she sat on the edge of their bed and cried for them in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in years. They would have known what to say. Her mother would have held her and told her she was strong enough to survive this. Her father would have been quietly furious on her behalf while offering practical advice. But they were gone, and she had to navigate this nightmare alone. Monday came again. 1 week since she'd hired Thomas Webb. She went to work, went through the motions, came home. No word from the investigator, which he'd warned was normal. These things took time. Patterns had to emerge. Evidence had to be gathered carefully. Tuesday and Wednesday passed the same way. By Thursday morning, exactly 10 days after she'd hired him, Suzanne was starting to wonder if maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe Brandon had been more careful than she thought. Maybe there was nothing to find. Then her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Hurst, this is Thomas Webb." Her heart started pounding. "You found something." "I found everything. Can you meet this afternoon? Say, 12:30 at the coffee shop on 5th and Market?" "Yes, I'll be there." Truce! She spent the rest of the morning in a state of suspended anxiety, unable to focus on anything. At noon, she told her assistant she was taking an extended lunch and drove to the coffee shop. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Thomas Webb was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table away from other customers. He was in his early 50s, average height and build, with the kind of forgettable face that probably served him well in his line of work. On the table in front of him sat a plain manila envelope. He stood when she approached. "Mrs. Hurst, call me Suzanne." She sat down, her eyes locked on the envelope. "What did you find?" Thomas settled back into his chair, his expression professionally compassionate. "Before you open that, I want you to understand that what's inside is going to be difficult. If you need time, if you want to wait until you're home or have someone with you, that's completely reasonable. I need to know now." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I've been living in limbo for 2 weeks. I can't do it anymore." He nodded and slid the envelope across the table. "Take your time. I'll be right here if you have questions." Suzanne picked up the envelope with hands that had started trembling again. The paper felt heavy, weighted with truth she'd been desperate and terrified to discover. She opened the clasp, pulled out the contents, and began reading the report that would confirm her worst fears and change everything. The first page was clinical, professional, a typed summary that reduced her destroyed marriage to bullet points and timestamps. Subject: Brandon Michael Hurst, age 40, sales associate at Harrington's department store. Surveillance period: December 9th through December 18th, 10 days of continuous monitoring. Third party identified: Christy Randall, age 36, regional manager for Harrington's department store chain. Subject's direct supervisor: married 15 years to Michael Randall, mother of 2 children, ages 12 and 9. Suzanne's hands tightened on the paper. Christy. The name she'd heard dozens, maybe hundreds of times over the past year. Christy approved my time off. Christy wants to redesign the floor layout. Christy said the new inventory system is coming next month. Always casual. Always professional. Never with any inflection that would make Suzanne think twice. His boss. Brandon was having an affair with his boss. The woman who controlled his schedule, his advancement opportunities, his entire professional life. How convenient. How perfectly arranged for secrecy and access. Her stomach turned. She forced herself to keep reading. Documented encounters. 9 separate meetings over 10-day period. Locations include restaurants, hotel, subject's vehicle, walking trail parking area. 9 times. 9 documented times in just 10 days. And those were only what Thomas had been able to observe. How many more had there been over the past months? How long had this really been going on? Suzanne turned to the next page and found photographs. Her breath caught in her throat. The first image showed Brandon and Christy leaving Harrington's through a side entrance. Not the main doors where other employees would see them. The side exit that led to the employee parking lot. The timestamp read, December 10th, 7:43 in the evening. Brandon's hand rested on the small of Christy's back, a gesture of casual intimacy that made Suzanne's chest constrict. The way his fingers curved possessively against her coat, the way she leaned slightly into his touch. They looked like a couple. They looked natural together. She flipped to the next photo. Brandon and Christy at a restaurant. Bella Notte, an upscale Italian place downtown where reservations required weeks of advance planning. They sat across from each other in a corner booth, the lighting low and romantic. Their heads were close together, leaning in, engaged in intense conversation. Christy's hand rested on top of Brandon's on the white tablecloth. Her fingers were intertwined with his. The wedding ring she wore caught the light. Suzanne's own wedding ring suddenly felt heavy on her finger. She looked down at it. A simple platinum band they'd chosen together 8 years ago. She'd never taken it off. Not once in 8 years. Not even when she showered or slept. And now she was looking at photos of her husband holding hands with another woman who was also wearing a wedding ring. Both of them married to other people. Both of them betraying vows they'd sworn to keep. The next series of photos made her feel physically ill. Brandon and Christy walking to his car after the restaurant, getting into the same vehicle. The surveillance log noted they drove 15 minutes to the Riverside Inn, a boutique hotel on the edge of downtown. Entry timestamp 9:32 p.m. Exit timestamp 11:57 p.m. 2.5 hours. They'd been in that hotel for 2.5 hours. Suzanne set down the photos, her hand pressed to her mouth, breathing slowly through her nose. The coffee shop sounds around her, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of other customers' conversations, the soft jazz playing overhead, all felt surreal, like she was underwater. "Do you need a break?" Thomas asked gently. She shook her head. She'd come this far. She needed to see all of it, needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to her. She picked up the next photo. December 12th. Brandon and Christy in his car, parked in a secluded area near a walking trail. The photo was taken through the windshield with a telephoto lens. They were kissing. His hand was in her hair. Her hand was on his chest. The image was clear, undeniable, intimate in a way that made Suzanne want to throw up. More photos followed. Another restaurant. This one, a casual lunch place. Christy laughing at something Brandon had said, her whole face lit up with joy. Brandon looking at her with an expression Suzanne recognized viscerally. It was the way he used to look at her, years ago, when their relationship was new, and everything felt electric and possible. December 14th, the photo that truly broke something inside Suzanne. Brandon and Christy at an outdoor shopping plaza. It was daytime, weekend, public. They were holding hands, walking casually past storefronts like any normal couple doing normal Saturday errands, window shopping, browsing, living a life together in plain view. They weren't even hiding anymore, or at least they'd stopped being as careful, getting sloppy with confidence, with the arrogance of people who thought they wouldn't get caught. Christy was pretty, Suzanne noted distantly, blonde hair cut in a stylish bob, well-dressed in expensive-looking clothes that suggested her regional manager's salary, fit and polished. She looked like someone who had her life together, someone successful and confident, not like someone who would blow up 2 marriages and destroy multiple lives for an affair with a subordinate employee. Suzanne turned to the next section of the report. Thomas had somehow obtained message records. She didn't ask how, probably didn't want to know, but there they were, printed screenshots of text conversations between Brandon and Christy, dating back 5 months. 5 months. Not weeks. Not a few bad decisions. 5 entire months of lying and planning and betrayal. She read through them chronologically, watching their relationship evolve from careful and coded to bold and explicit. July 15th. Christy. Good seeing you today. Lunch was nice. Brandon. Yeah, it was. We should do it again sometime. Professional enough. Deniable. But even in those early messages, Suzanne could see the subtext. The way lunch was nice carried weight beyond collegiality. August 3rd. Brandon. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. Christy. Me neither. This is dangerous. Brandon. I know, but I don't want to stop. August 22nd. Christy. I dream about you. Is that crazy? Brandon: If it is, we're both crazy. I feel the same way. Suzanne's hands were shaking now, but she kept reading, watching their affair bloom across text messages like watching a car crash in slow motion, unable to look away. September 10th. Brandon: I think I'm falling in love with you. Christy: Don't say that, unless you mean it. Brandon: I mean it. I've never felt like this before. Never felt like this before? Suzanne closed her eyes briefly. They'd been married for 8 years, together for 10, and he was telling another woman he'd never felt this way before, erasing their entire history with one text message. October 5th. Christy: We can't keep doing this. We both have spouses. This is wrong. Brandon: I know, but being without you feels more wrong. Christy: What are we going to do? Brandon: I don't know yet, but I can't give you up. October 28th. Brandon: I need to be with you. Really be with you. Not just stolen hours. Christy: Me too. But how? Brandon: We leave them. Both of us. We start over. Christy: Are you serious? Brandon: Completely. I want to build a real life with you. Suzanne felt tears streaming down her face. She hadn't even realized she was crying. Thomas quietly pushed a small stack of napkins across the table. She took them, wiped her eyes, kept reading. November 15th. Christy: I'm scared. My kids. Michael. Everything will blow up. Brandon: I know. I'm scared too. But I love you. That has to be worth the risk. Christy: When? Brandon: After the holidays. We'll both tell them in January. But that timeline had accelerated. The next messages made that clear. November 28th. Brandon: I can't do this anymore. Living a lie every single day is killing me. I'm going to tell her. Soon. We can finally start our real life together. Christy: Are you sure? Really sure? Brandon: I've never been more sure of anything. I want to wake up next to you. I want to come home to you. I want everything with you. Christy: I want that too. God, I want that so much. Brandon: Then let's do it. Let's be brave. December 4th. Brandon: Told my lawyer to draw up divorce papers. Planning to tell Suzanne next week. This is really happening. We're really going to be together. Christy: I can't wait. I love you. We deserve this happiness. Brandon: We do. I'll call you after I talk to her. Suzanne set down the messages. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They were completely steady. The initial shock was fading, replaced by something colder, something harder. Crystal clarity. She'd been right about everything. Every suspicion, every instinct that told her something was wrong. She hadn't been paranoid or oversensitive or imagining things. Brandon had been lying to her face for 5 months, sleeping beside her while texting another woman about their future together, making plans to leave while still wearing his wedding ring and eating dinners she cooked, and accepting her love like it was something he was entitled to, even while planning to discard it. And Christy, married for 15 years. 2 children who had no idea their mother was sneaking off to hotels with an employee she supervised. A husband who probably trusted her the same way Suzanne had trusted Brandon. Planning to blow up her entire family at the same time, Brandon destroyed his marriage. Thomas cleared his throat gently. There's more. Page 12. Suzanne flipped to page 12 and found financial records, credit checks, rental applications. Her stomach dropped. They'd been looking at apartments together. A 2-bedroom in the downtown area, modern building with amenities, monthly rent that would require both their incomes. The application was dated 2 weeks ago. Both their names were listed. Brandon Michael Hurst and Christy Ann Randall, applying to lease together, planning their cohabitation while still married to other people. There were virtual tour screenshots. A sleek apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, stainless steel appliances, hardwood floors. Their future home. The life they were building while dismantling the lives they already had. Suzanne closed the envelope and looked up at Thomas. Is this everything? Everything I found in 10 days. 9 documented meetings, 5 months of message history, evidence of cohabitation planning, proof of physical affair. It's comprehensive." He paused, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hurst. I know this isn't what anyone wants to see, but it's what I needed to see." Her voice was surprisingly calm now, steady, clear. "Thank you for being thorough. What will you do with this information?" The question hung in the air between them. What would she do? She had everything now. Documented proof of the affair, the identity of the other woman, timeline, evidence that could destroy both their careers, relationships between supervisors and subordinates violated every corporate ethics policy. She could send this to Harrington's Human Resources Department, and they'd both be terminated immediately. She had Christie's husband's name, Michael Randall. Easy enough to find his contact information. She could send him everything. Let him see exactly what his wife of 15 years had been doing. Let him feel the same betrayal, the same shock, the same soul-crushing realization that his marriage was built on lies. She could make them pay, both of them, for every lie, for every stolen moment, for every text message about love while they were betraying people who actually loved them, for the coldness Brandon had shown when he asked for divorce, refusing to give her explanations while knowing exactly why he was leaving. The thoughts came quickly, each one darker than the last. Human resources, Michael Randall, social media, public humiliation, professional destruction, making them lose everything the way she'd lost everything. "Mrs. Hurst?" Thomas was watching her carefully. Suzanne realized she'd been silent for too long, staring at the envelope with an expression she couldn't identify. She shook her head slightly, coming back to the present. "Sorry, I'm just processing all of this. Take whatever time you need." He slid a business card across the table. "That's my final invoice for the remaining balance. No rush on payment. And if you need anything else going forward, additional documentation, testimony for divorce proceedings, you call me." She took the card and stood up, gathering the envelope carefully. "Thank you, Thomas. Really, this must have been difficult work. I hope you find peace with all of this," he said, standing as well. "However, that looks for you." Suzanne walked out of the coffee shop into the cold December afternoon. The sky was gray, threatening snow. She got into her car but didn't start the engine. Just sat there in the parking lot, the envelope in her lap, staring through the windshield at nothing. She had all the answers now. Every single question that had tortured her for weeks had been answered in brutal, photographic detail. She knew who, knew how long, knew the extent of the planning and deception, knew they'd been building a future together while destroying hers, knew they'd talked about love and happiness and deserving better while showing no consideration for the people they were betraying. And knowing didn't make it hurt less. If anything, seeing the proof made it worse. Because there was no ambiguity left to hide behind. No possibility that maybe it was a mistake, maybe he'd been confused. Maybe there was a chance he'd realize what he'd thrown away and come back. There was just cold, documented fact. He loved someone else, had loved her for months, had planned meticulously to leave, and now he was gone, living the life he'd chosen, with the woman he'd chosen, while Suzanne was left to pick up the pieces alone. She finally started the car and drove home. The house felt emptier than ever when she walked in. She set the envelope on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. All that power, all that potential destruction, right there in a manila folder. 3 copies, she thought. 1 for Harrington's Human Resources Department, 1 for Michael Randall, 1 for her divorce attorney. Simple, clean, devastating. She opened her laptop and navigated to Harrington's corporate website. Found the Human Resources email address within minutes. It would be so easy. Scan the relevant pages. Attach them to an email with a simple subject line. Ethics Violation Report. Regional Manager Christy Randall and Employee Brandon Hurst. Hit send. By tomorrow morning, they'd both be called into separate meetings. By tomorrow afternoon, both unemployed. Christy would lose her regional manager position. The career she'd built over years, the 6-figure salary, the professional reputation. All gone because she couldn't keep her hands off a subordinate employee. Brandon would lose the job he'd held for 12 years, the steady paycheck, the benefits, any chance at a good reference for future employment. All gone because he'd been willing to risk everything for an affair with his boss. Suzanne opened her email and started typing. To whom it may concern, I am writing to report a violation of your company's ethics policy regarding relationships between supervisors and subordinates. Regional Manager Christy Randall has been engaged in an intimate relationship with sales associate Brandon Hurst, her direct report, for approximately 5 months. I have documentation including photographs, timestamps, and message records confirming this relationship. As you are aware, such relationships create conflicts of interest and violate the professional standards outlined in your employee handbook. She stopped typing. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The cursor blinked in the white space, waiting for her to continue. She could finish this email, could attach all the damning evidence, could send it with one click and set in motion the destruction of both their professional lives. Instead, she closed the laptop. She picked up her phone and searched for Michael Randall. Found him easily. He had public social media profiles. His Facebook showed a normal life, family photos, pictures of his 2 kids at soccer games and school events, posts about weekend barbecues and home improvement projects. A man who had no idea his wife was planning to leave him for a sales associate from her company? Suzanne could message him right now. Could write, "Your wife has been having an affair with my husband for 5 months. Here's proof." Could attach the photos, the messages, the hotel receipts. Could give him the same brutal awakening she'd had. Could make him feel exactly what she was feeling. Her thumbs moved over the screen, typing out a message. "Mr. Randall, I'm sorry to contact you this way, but there's something you need to know about your wife." She stopped, read what she'd written, deleted it. Suzanne set down the phone and pressed her hands to her face. What was she doing? Why was this so hard? They deserved it, both of them. They'd shown no mercy, no consideration, no respect for their spouses or their vows. They'd lied and planned and conspired. They'd stolen moments of happiness while creating devastation for the people who loved them. Why should she show them any mercy now? She stood up and paced the kitchen, back and forth, back and forth. The envelope sat on the table like a weapon she couldn't decide whether to use. Her mother's old clock ticked on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Each second a small eternity of indecision. She thought about her mother. About sitting in this same kitchen as a teenager, crying over some high school drama that felt world-ending at the time. Her mother had sat across from her, peeling apples for a pie, and said something Suzanne had never forgotten. "Sweetheart, you get to choose what kind of person you are when people hurt you. You can hurt them back, or you can choose to be better than the hurt. Both are choices, but only one of them lets you move forward." She thought about her father, the way he'd handled conflict with quiet dignity, never raising his voice, never seeking revenge, just drawing clear boundaries and walking away from toxicity without looking back. "Don't waste energy on people who don't deserve it," he used to say. "Put that energy into building something better." She thought about Bethany's story. 2 weeks spent planning destruction. 2 weeks of obsession and rage and plotting. 2 weeks that accomplished nothing except keeping her chained to the person who'd hurt her. "I regret wasting that time," Bethany had said. "Time I could have spent healing." Suzanne sank into a kitchen chair and stared at the envelope. The question wasn't whether Brandon and Christy deserved consequences. They did. The question was whether she wanted to be the instrument of those consequences, whether she wanted to carry that weight, whether revenge would actually give her what she needed, which wasn't their destruction, it was her own peace. Would destroying their careers bring Brandon back? No. Would exposing the affair to Michael Randall undo the betrayal? No. Would any of it heal the wound in her chest that felt like it would never close? No. It would give her a moment of satisfaction, maybe. A brief rush of vindication watching them face consequences. But then what? Then she'd still be alone, still be betrayed, still be having to rebuild her life from nothing, and she'd be tied forever to their downfall, unable to move forward because part of her would always be looking back, watching them suffer, needing them to keep suffering to justify what she'd done. The envelope would keep her prisoner, not Brandon, not Christy. The envelope itself, the choice to destroy, the energy and time and emotional investment required to execute revenge. All of it would keep her chained to this moment, to this pain, to these people who'd already taken too much from her. She picked up the envelope and walked to the home office, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, set it inside carefully, closed the drawer, not destroyed, not sent, just held, in reserve, in case circumstances changed, in case she needed it later, but for now, not acted upon. She went back to the kitchen and picked up her phone, scrolled to Patricia Morrison, the divorce attorney who'd been recommended to her by a co-worker, left a message requesting a consultation. That was where this evidence belonged, in a legal proceeding to protect her interests, not as a weapon of mass destruction. Suzanne walked to the back door and looked out at the yard. Her mother's garden was dormant now, bare branches and sleeping earth waiting for spring. But come April, those roses would bloom again, pink and red and white, just like they did every year. Faithful, reliable, beautiful after the darkness of winter. Everything had seasons, death and dormancy and resurrection. She was in the death part now, the dormant part, but spring would come. Eventually, if she could just hold on. She made herself dinner, just soup and crackers, but it was food. She ate it slowly, mechanically, forcing each bite down. Then she cleaned up the kitchen, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. Not to the guest room this time, to the master bedroom, her bedroom. She lay in bed in the darkness, her mind replaying everything she'd learned. The photos, the messages, the timeline of betrayal laid out in irrefutable detail. It hurt. God, it hurt. But she also felt something else underneath the pain. Something unexpected. Relief. She finally knew. The uncertainty was over. She could stop wondering, stop imagining, stop torturing herself with questions. She had answers. And while those answers were painful, at least they were definite. She could finally begin to process what had actually happened instead of what she feared had happened. She'd made a choice today, not to be the instrument of their destruction. It felt impossibly hard and strangely light at the same time, like setting down a burden she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. She didn't know if it was the right choice, but it was her choice. And for tonight, that was enough. Monday morning, Suzanne woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She showered, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that made her feel armored, and drove to Patricia Morrison's office downtown. The law firm occupied the third floor of a renovated historic building, all exposed brick and modern fixtures. The waiting room was designed to be calming. Soft blues and grays, comfortable leather chairs, abstract art on the walls. A space for people going through one of the worst experiences of their lives. Patricia Morrison was in her late 50s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and intelligent eyes behind thin-framed glasses. She shook Suzanne's hand firmly and led her into a private office lined with law books. "Tell me everything," Patricia said, settling into her chair with a legal pad ready. Suzanne told the story she was getting better at telling. The sudden divorce request, the suspected affair, the private investigator. She slid Thomas Webb's report across the desk as she spoke. Patricia read through it methodically, her expression neutral and professional, occasionally making notes. When she finished reading, Patricia set down her pen and looked at Suzanne directly. "This is extremely thorough documentation. Very helpful for our purposes. Have you shared this information with anyone else?" "No, just you." "Good." Patricia folded her hands on top of the report. Let me explain how this works. Your husband filed for divorce. You didn't. In this state, that doesn't affect the actual dissolution of marriage. We're a no-fault state, but it matters a great deal for asset division and settlement negotiations. The house was mine before we married, Suzanne said. My parents built it. I inherited it 5 years ago when they died. We moved in together after that. Patricia made a note. Was his name ever added to the deed? No. It's still only in my name. Excellent. That simplifies things considerably. Patricia continued writing. Premarital inheritance is protected property. The house is yours, free and clear. He has no legal claim to it, regardless of any contributions he might claim to have made toward maintenance or improvements. Suzanne felt something unclench in her chest. The house. Her parents' house. It was safe. He couldn't take that from her. What about other assets? Patricia asked. Joint accounts? Retirement funds? Vehicles? Any shared property? They went through the inventory methodically. One small joint checking account used for household expenses, containing about $3,000. Suzanne had her own savings account, her own retirement fund through work. Brandon had a modest 401k from Harrington's. No shared investments, no jointly owned vehicles. Their financial lives had been more separate than Suzanne had realized. This is straightforward, Patricia said. Given that he initiated the divorce, given the documentation of his affair, and given that your primary asset is protected premarital inheritance, here's what I anticipate. He gets his personal belongings, his vehicle, his retirement account, and half of the joint checking. You keep the house, your vehicle, your retirement fund, and your separate accounts. So, what about spousal support? In a marriage of 8 years with no children and where both parties are employed? Unlikely. He might try to claim it, but with this evidence of his affair and his current cohabitation with another woman, no judge would award it. If anything, he should be grateful we're not pursuing a fault-based division that might go even more in your favor. Patricia explained the process. Timeline of 3 to 4 months if he didn't contest anything. Longer if he fought. Communication would go through attorneys exclusively. Suzanne wouldn't have to speak to Brandon directly again unless she chose to. I'll need to keep this investigative report, Patricia said, tapping the folder. It's crucial evidence for protecting your interests. Are you comfortable with that? Yes. That's why I brought it. They spent another 40 minutes on paperwork, retainer agreements, next steps. Patricia would file the response to Brandon's petition, handle all communication with his attorney, shield Suzanne from the worst of the legal process. When Suzanne left the office 2 hours later, she felt something she hadn't felt since that terrible Thursday night. A sense of control, a plan, professional help navigating the devastation. That evening, Suzanne did something she'd been avoiding. She went into the master bedroom with purpose. She'd been sleeping there, yes, but she hadn't truly reclaimed the space. Now she began systematically removing every trace of Brandon that remained. The wedding photos came down first. She took them off the dresser, off the walls, each frame a memory that now felt contaminated by lies. Their wedding day at the Botanical Garden, their honeymoon in Hawaii, various anniversaries where they smiled at the camera, his arm around her, both of them looking happy and in love. Had he loved her then? Or had that been a lie, too? She couldn't tell anymore. Couldn't trust any memory not to be tainted by what she now knew. She packed the photos carefully into a box. Maybe someday she'd be able to look at them and remember the good parts. Today wasn't that day. She went through every drawer, every shelf, finding the random things he'd left behind or overlooked. A watch that had stopped working, old receipts in the nightstand, a book he'd been reading but never finished, some thriller with a broken spine marking his place on page 87. Everything went into boxes. She wasn't angry as she packed, wasn't crying, just methodical, efficient, taking back territory one item at a time. By 9 o'clock that night, the bedroom was transformed. She'd stripped and washed all the bedding again, rearranged the furniture, moving the bed to a different wall, changing the entire energy of the space. Hung different artwork she'd found in the basement, pieces her mother had painted years ago. It wasn't drastic, but it was different. It was hers. She carried the boxes down to the basement, stacking them next to the others, out of sight. Eventually she'd figure out how to return his things, but that was a problem for another day. For now, they were simply gone from her daily environment. The days began to take on a new rhythm. Not the numb fog of the first weeks, but a kind of purposeful moving forward. Suzanne went to work and threw herself into her projects with renewed focus. She ate regular meals, forcing herself even when she wasn't hungry, knowing her body needed fuel. She started seeing Dr. Sarah Whitfield, a therapist Patricia had recommended who specialized in divorce recovery. The first therapy session was harder than Suzanne expected. Dr. Whitfield's office was in a quiet building near the hospital. The room warm and comfortable with soft lighting and a couch that wasn't quite clinical. The doctor herself was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and an directness that Suzanne appreciated immediately. "Tell me about your marriage," Dr. Whitfield said, after the initial pleasantries. Suzanne told the story again, but this time the therapist interrupted with different questions. Uncomfortable questions. "What did you lose when Brandon left?" Suzanne stared at her hands, folded in her lap. "Everything. My marriage. My future. My—" "Try again." Dr. Whitfield's voice was gentle but firm. "What part of yourself did you lose?" Suzanne's throat tightened. She hadn't expected the question to hit so hard. "The part that believed I was enough." Enough for what? For him to stay. For him to love. For him to choose. The tears started then, hot and unexpected. "I thought I was enough, and I wasn't." "Or," Dr. Whitfield said quietly, "he wasn't enough for you. Have you considered that?" The sessions continued weekly, each one peeling back layers Suzanne hadn't known existed. Dr. Whitfield asked about her marriage before the affair, about the patterns, the dynamic, the ways Suzanne had accommodated, adjusted, made herself smaller to avoid conflict. "You've been walking on eggshells for months," Dr. Whitfield observed during their third session. "Maybe longer. When did you stop feeling safe being yourself with him?" Suzanne thought about it. Really thought about it. "I don't know. It was gradual. I just started editing myself, not bringing up certain topics because I knew he'd shut down, not asking for what I needed because I didn't want to seem needy. Just trying to be easy, to be low maintenance, to not add to his stress." "And how did that feel?" "Exhausting." "What have you gained then?" Dr. Whitfield asked. "Not losing Brandon. Gaining something by his absence." At first, Suzanne couldn't answer. What could possibly be gained from this nightmare? But slowly, over weeks of sessions, she started to see it. Freedom from walking on eggshells. Freedom from wondering when the other shoe would drop. Freedom from being with someone who was emotionally absent, who made her feel like her very existence was an imposition. "I don't have to earn someone's presence anymore," Suzanne said during their fifth session. "I don't have to prove I'm worth staying for." I didn't realize how heavy that was until I didn't have to carry it anymore. Christmas approached, and Suzanne had been dreading it. The first major holiday alone. But Bethany invited her for Christmas dinner with her family, and it turned out to be easier than expected. Being around other people's joy and noise and chaos was better than sitting alone in the house with ghosts and memories. Bethany's teenage daughter accidentally knocked over the gravy boat, and everyone laughed instead of panicking. Bethany's mother told embarrassing stories from Bethany's childhood. The dog stole a dinner roll off someone's plate when they weren't looking. It was messy and imperfect and real, and Suzanne realized she was smiling. Actually smiling. For the first time in weeks, she felt almost normal. "Thank you for including me," Suzanne said, as she helped Bethany clean up after dinner. "You're always welcome here." Bethany handed her a dish to dry. "How are you really doing?" "Better. Some days. Therapy helps. Having a plan helps." Suzanne dried the dish carefully. "I filed for divorce officially. Well, responded to his filing. My lawyer says it should be final by spring. Good. And the investigation report? In my lawyer's hands. I didn't send it to his company or to Christie's husband. Suzanne set down the dish. I almost did. I had the emails drafted, but I didn't. Do you regret that? No. I think I made the right choice. For me. New Year's Eve, Suzanne stayed home. She wasn't ready for parties or crowds or forced celebration. She opened a bottle of wine, watched the ball drop on television, and made no resolutions, just breathed her way from one year into the next. The year Brandon left, the year she started rebuilding. January brought more paperwork. Patricia filed all the necessary legal documents. Brandon's attorney responded with minor disputes about the joint checking account and some furniture he claimed to have purchased. Patricia shut it down quickly, pointing to the premarital status of the house and making subtle references to the evidence of his affair. The disputes disappeared. Through the legal grapevine, Suzanne learned that Brandon and Christie were living together. The apartment downtown they'd applied for together, playing house, building their new life while the wreckage of their old ones was still settling around them. She waited for the rage to come. It didn't. Just a dull indifference. They were strangers now, people she used to know who'd made choices she couldn't understand. Their happiness or lack thereof had nothing to do with her anymore. February was brutally cold. Suzanne volunteered for every project at work, keeping herself busy, keeping her mind occupied. Her boss noticed and rewarded her with more responsibility, assigning her lead on the company's largest marketing campaign. It was challenging work that demanded all her focus and creativity. She was good at it, better than good. The campaign was tracking above projected performance metrics within the first 2 weeks. It felt good to be good at something, to make decisions that mattered, and see positive results. Her professional life had never been touched by Brandon's betrayal. That part of her was still whole, still capable, still valuable. She could build on that. In early March, Patricia called with news. He signed everything. No more disputes. Final decree should be issued within 6 weeks. April 15th is the scheduled court date. April 15th. Suzanne marked it on her calendar in red ink. The date her marriage would officially end. The date she'd legally become Suzanne Hurst, unmarried, sole owner of her home, free of legal ties to a man who'd discarded her like she meant nothing. Mid-March brought an unexpected development. Suzanne was in her office when Bethany appeared in the doorway, her expression odd. "Have you been online today?" Bethany asked, closing the door behind her. "Not really." "Why?" Bethany pulled out her phone and navigated to a local business news site, held it out for Suzanne to see. The headline read, "Major retail chain terminates regional manager following ethics investigation." Suzanne's heart started pounding. She took the phone and read quickly. The article didn't name anyone specifically, citing privacy concerns and ongoing legal matters. But it detailed the situation. An anonymous complaint filed with corporate human resources regarding an inappropriate relationship between a regional manager and a subordinate employee. An internal investigation launched. Both parties terminated for violating the company's code of ethics and creating conflicts of interest. "That's them," Bethany said quietly. "That has to be Brandon and Christie. The timeline matches. Regional manager and subordinate." Suzanne set down the phone. Her hands were completely steady. "I didn't do this." "I know you didn't. I know you decided not to send anything." Bethany sat down in the chair across from Suzanne's desk. Someone else must have seen them. Or maybe another employee reported it. 9 encounters in 10 days. They were getting sloppy. Suzanne thought about the side door exits, the hotel visits, the public shopping trip. Thomas had documented all of it in just 10 days. How many other people might have noticed over 5 months? A coworker leaving at the same time? A customer who recognized them? Another employee who saw them together and put 2 and 2 together? Eventually, someone was bound to report it. The truth always came out. It was just a matter of when. "How do you feel about it?" Bethany asked carefully. Suzanne considered the question honestly. Brandon had lost his job. Christy had lost her career. The consequences she'd held in reserve, the revenge she'd chosen not to take, had happened anyway without her involvement. "I don't know," she said finally. "I didn't want to be the one to do it, but I'm not sorry it happened." That was true. She wasn't celebrating their misfortune, wasn't gloating. But she also wasn't mourning for them. They'd made choices. Choices had consequences. The universe had simply delivered those consequences without requiring her participation. Over the next few days, more details emerged through the inevitable gossip network. Christie's husband had filed for divorce immediately after the company investigation. He was seeking primary custody of their 2 children and the marital home. The scandal had spread through their social circles. Christie's professional reputation was destroyed. She'd never work at that level in retail management again, not after being terminated for an ethics violation. Brandon was in an even worse position, unemployed and, according to someone who knew someone, no longer with Christie. Apparently she'd blamed him entirely for the destruction of her career and family. "You pursued me," she'd allegedly said. "You promised we'd be happy. You ruined my life." They'd broken up within a week of being fired, each blaming the other for consequences they'd created together. Suzanne heard all this secondhand through the gossip chain that forms around any scandal. She listened without commenting, without contributing. It had nothing to do with her anymore. She'd made peace with that. She focused on her own life instead. On the promotion her boss had hinted at during her last review, senior marketing manager with a significant raise. On the pottery class at the community center, where her bowls were finally starting to look like actual bowls instead of lopsided disasters. On the therapy appointments that were slowly helping her rebuild her sense of self-worth. April 15th arrived clear and cool. The kind of spring day that promised winter was finally over. Suzanne dressed carefully in a navy suit, applied makeup with precision, and drove to the courthouse alone. She'd considered asking Bethany to come with her, but decided she needed to do this by herself. Close this chapter on her own terms. The courthouse was busy, people moving through hallways with purpose, clutching folders and briefcases. She found the correct courtroom and sat in the waiting area until her case was called. When her name was announced, Hurst versus Hurst, she stood and walked into the courtroom with her head high. Patricia was already there, along with Brandon's attorney. But Brandon himself wasn't present. He'd waived his right to appear, apparently. Couldn't even be bothered to show up for the official end of their marriage. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She reviewed the paperwork efficiently, asked a few standard questions to confirm Suzanne understood the terms, then signed the decree with a quick flourish. "The marriage is hereby dissolved," the judge said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Good luck to you, Mrs. Hurst." That was it. 8 years of marriage dissolved in less than 15 minutes of bureaucratic process. Suzanne walked out of the courtroom with the final decree in her hand. Officially divorced. Officially free. The spring sunshine felt warm on her face as she crossed the parking lot to her car. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, holding the decree, feeling the weight of it. Or rather, the lack of weight. It was just paper. Legal paper that changed her status, but didn't change who she was or what she'd survived. She pulled out her phone and texted Bethany. "It's official. Divorced as of today. Want to get dinner tonight to celebrate?" Bethany's response came within seconds. "Absolutely. Thai place at 7? Perfect." Suzanne spent the afternoon doing ordinary things. Grocery shopping. Laundry. She went out to the backyard and examined her mother's garden. The roses were budding. Tight green swirls that would bloom pink and red and white in a few weeks. Spring was coming. Everything was waking up, growing, beginning again. Maybe she could do that too. That evening at the restaurant, Suzanne and Bethany split an order of pad thai, and drank wine from stemless glasses. Bethany raised hers in a toast. To new beginnings. To surviving, Suzanne countered. To both, Bethany grinned. They clinked glasses and drank. Suzanne felt lighter than she had in months. The legal weight of the divorce was behind her now. The worst had already happened. The betrayal, the discovery, the devastation. She'd survived all of it. Everything from here was just moving forward, one day at a time. "Have you heard from him at all?" Bethany asked carefully between bites of curry. "Brandon? No, not since that first night." Suzanne twirled noodles around her fork. "I blocked his number immediately. All communication went through Patricia." "Good." Bethany hesitated. "I heard through the grapevine that he's having a really rough time. Lost his job, lost Christy, living in some efficiency apartment across town, working retail at some discount store for minimum wage." Suzanne absorbed this information without emotion. "That's unfortunate for him. You don't feel bad at all?" "I feel nothing," Suzanne said honestly. "He made his choices. I made mine. We're both living with the consequences. I'm not responsible for saving him from his own decisions." And that was true. She'd chosen not to be the architect of his destruction, but she also wasn't responsible for preventing the natural consequences of his actions. He'd built his own collapse through lies and selfishness and betrayal. The foundation had been rotten from the start. It was only a matter of time before the whole structure fell apart. They finished dinner and said goodnight in the parking lot. Suzanne drove home feeling almost normal for the first time in months. She went inside, changed into comfortable clothes, and curled up on the couch with a book about resilience and growth that Dr. Whitfield had recommended. She read until her eyes grew heavy, then went upstairs to the master bedroom. Her bedroom now, completely reclaimed. No ghosts, no memories of Brandon, just her space, her sanctuary, her fresh start. She slept deeply that night. No dreams, no nightmares, just peaceful, restorative sleep. When she woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the windows, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Spring unfolded slowly, tentatively, like the world was testing whether it was safe to bloom again. Suzanne felt the same way. Each day was a small step forward, sometimes 2 steps back, but always moving in some direction that felt less like drowning and more like swimming. The promotion came through in early May. Senior Marketing Manager. A corner office with windows that actually opened. A team of 8 people reporting directly to her. A salary increase that made her blink twice when she saw the offer letter. She accepted immediately, surprised by how much pride she felt. This was hers. Something she'd earned through skill and hard work, untouched by Brandon's betrayal. Her first day in the new role, her team brought her coffee and a plant for her desk, a small succulent in a ceramic pot. "For new beginnings," her assistant Jennifer said, and Suzanne had to blink back unexpected tears. Good tears, for once. Grateful tears. Work became more than a distraction. It became proof of capability, of value, of forward motion. She led campaign strategy meetings with confidence, made decisions that affected 7-figure budgets, mentored younger team members who reminded her of herself a decade ago, hungry, ambitious, trying to prove themselves. She was good at this, better than good, and it mattered in a way it never had before. The pottery class remained her Wednesday evening ritual. She'd progressed from lopsided bowls to things that almost looked intentional. Her instructor, a soft-spoken man in his 60s named Robert, praised her patience with the clay. "You're learning to let it speak," he said one evening, watching her center a new piece on the wheel. "Stop trying to force it into what you think it should be. Listen to what it wants to become." Leaders. Suzanne thought about that long after class ended. Stop forcing. Start listening. Maybe that applied to more than just clay. Therapy with Dr. Whitfield continued to peel back layers. In one session in late May, they talked about the envelopes still locked in her desk drawer at home. "You kept them," Dr. Whitfield observed. You didn't destroy the evidence, but you didn't use it either. What does that mean to you? Suzanne thought carefully before answering. Insurance, maybe? Or proof that I could have chosen differently? That I made a conscious choice not to destroy them, not just passivity. Do you still think about sending them? Sometimes, when I'm angry, when I remember how cold he was that night. Suzanne picked at a thread on the couch cushion. But mostly no. Mostly I'm just glad I don't have that weight on my conscience. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. You chose peace over revenge. That's not weakness. That's strength. But the real breakthrough came in early June, during a session where Dr. Whitfield asked a question that changed everything. What did you love about yourself before you met Brandon? Suzanne opened her mouth to answer and found she couldn't. The question had never occurred to her. She'd spent so much time thinking about who she was in relation to him, as his girlfriend, his wife, his discarded ex, that she'd forgotten who she was before any of that. I don't remember, she admitted quietly. Then that's your homework, Dr. Whitfield said. Remember who Suzanne was at 27, before Brandon existed in her world? What did she love? What made her laugh? What did she dream about? Suzanne spent the next week thinking about that younger version of herself. She dug through old photo albums her mother had kept, finding pictures from her mid-20s. There she was at a friend's birthday party, laughing with her head thrown back. There she was on a hiking trip, muddy and exhausted and grinning. There she was at her college graduation, her whole future ahead of her, eyes bright with possibility. That woman had been adventurous, spontaneous. She'd taken salsa dancing classes on a whim. She'd driven to the coast for weekend camping trips without planning anything. She'd tried new restaurants alone just to experience them. She'd been confident in her own company. When had she lost that? Slowly, over years of accommodation and adjustment, making herself smaller, quieter, easier, editing out the parts of herself that might be inconvenient, or too much, or not enough. I want her back, Suzanne told Dr. Whitfield at their next session. That version of me, the one who wasn't afraid to take up space. Then, go get her. In late June, Suzanne's boss approached her about a marketing conference in San Francisco. 3 days, all expenses paid, representing the company at a national level alongside the executive team. The old Suzanne would have hesitated, would have worried about the expense despite it being covered, about whether she deserved the opportunity, about leaving home for 3 days. The new Suzanne, or maybe the reclaimed Suzanne, didn't hesitate at all. Yes, absolutely. She flew to San Francisco in early July, stayed in a hotel near Union Square with a view of the bay, attended conference sessions during the day, absorbing information, networking with other marketing directors, representing her company with confidence she was still learning to trust. In the evenings, she explored the city alone. She walked along Fisherman's Wharf as the sun set, eating overpriced ice cream and watching street performers. She took a cable car to Chinatown and wandered through markets full of things she didn't need, but enjoyed looking at anyway. She ate dinner at small restaurants by herself, not hiding behind her phone, just being present with the experience. On the last evening, she found herself at a park overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, watching fog roll in from the ocean. The air was cool and salt-tinged. Other people dotted the grass. Couples, families, individuals like her. A man with a guitar played softly somewhere behind her. Suzanne sat on a bench and realized something that made her breath catch. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. There was a difference she was finally understanding. Loneliness was an ache, a void where something should be. Being alone was just a state of being, and it could be peaceful, even beautiful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Bethany. "How's San Francisco?" Suzanne took a photo of the bridge, the fog, the fading light, sent it with a simple caption, "I'm happy," and she was. Not constantly, not overwhelmingly, but in this moment, sitting on a bench 3,000 miles from home, Watching the sun disappear into the Pacific, she was genuinely, surprisingly happy. The flight home felt different. Suzanne looked out the window at the patchwork of land below and took stock of where she was. 5 months since the divorce was finalized. 7 months since Brandon had walked out. Almost a year since that September evening, when she'd first noticed him smiling at his phone like it held secrets. A year of transformation, of pain and growth, and becoming someone she was still getting to know but was starting to respect. Someone who could sit with discomfort, who could make hard choices, who could choose dignity over revenge and mean it. September arrived again, bringing with it the anniversary of when everything started unraveling. Suzanne had been dreading it, expecting the day to hit hard. But when it came, she found herself in the backyard with her mother's old gardening gloves, tending to the roses that had bloomed spectacularly that summer. She was deadheading spent flowers, making room for new growth, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was spam. But something made her pick up. "Hello? Suzanne? It's Brandon." Her hand tightened on the phone. She hadn't heard his voice in 9 months. It sounded different than she remembered. Smaller somehow. Defeated. "How did you get this number? Please don't hang up." His words came fast, desperate. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm begging you. Just give me 5 minutes. I need to explain. I made the biggest mistake of my life." Suzanne felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no curiosity. Just a mild irritation at the interruption. She looked at the roses in her hand, their petals soft and perfect. "Brandon, Please." His voice cracked. "I was confused. Christy manipulated me. I see that now. What we had, what we built together for 8 years, that was real. That mattered. I threw it away for something that turned out to be nothing. I'm so sorry." More words poured out. "I'm living in a terrible studio apartment. I can barely afford rent. I lost everything. Lost my job. Lost Christy. Lost you. You were the best thing in my life, and I destroyed it. Please give me another chance. We can start over. We can be even better than before. I still love you. I never stopped loving you." Suzanne listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finally ran out of words, there was silence on the line. She could hear his breathing, ragged and hopeful. "Are you done?" she asked calmly. "Suzanne, please? I'm going to say this once, so listen carefully." Her voice was steady, clear. "What you did to me was cruel. You planned your exit for months while I still believed we had a marriage. You refused to give me basic honesty or respect. You made me feel like I wasn't worth an explanation. I know I was wrong." "I'm not finished." Her tone sharpened. "You're not sorry about what you did. You're sorry about the consequences. You didn't love me then, and you don't love me now. You love the idea of not being alone, of having someone to fall back on now that everything else fell apart. That's not true. It is true. And here's what you need to understand. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your soft place to land. I'm not interested in being chosen because you ran out of other options. Please, just let me see you. Let me prove—" No, the word was final, absolute. "I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want anything from you except for you to leave me alone. We're done, Brandon. We were done the night you walked out, and I'm actually grateful for that now. Suzanne." She ended the call and immediately blocked the number, set the phone down on the patio table. Her hands were completely steady. Her breathing was calm. She felt nothing except relief that the conversation was over. She went back to the roses, trimmed another spent bloom. The garden was thriving. Her mother would have been proud. Over the next week, Brandon found other ways to reach her. An email to her work address. She marked it as spam without reading past the first line. A message through Facebook. She blocked him there too. A letter delivered to the house by actual mail. His handwriting on the envelope. She threw it away, unopened. Then, one Thursday evening, She was in the kitchen making dinner when she heard knocking at the front door. Persistent, urgent. She looked through the window and saw Brandon standing on the porch. He looked terrible, thinner than she remembered, wearing clothes that hung loose on his frame. His hair needed cutting. His face was haggard, drawn. He knocked again, harder. "Suzanne, I know you're home. Please, just talk to me." She stood frozen for a moment, watching him through the glass. Part of her, a very small part, felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, but mostly she felt nothing, just a firm certainty that he had no business being here. She pulled out her phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. "My ex-husband is on my property refusing to leave. I've asked him multiple times to stop contacting me. I'd like him escorted off the premises." The dispatcher was professional, efficient. Officers were on their way. Suzanne stayed inside, watching through the window as Brandon continued knocking, calling her name, alternating between pleading and anger. "You owe me at least a conversation. After 8 years, you can't just ignore me like I never existed." But she could, and she was. The police arrived within 12 minutes. 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female, both calm and professional. They approached Brandon, spoke to him briefly. His body language changed. Defensive at first, then defeated. 1 officer gestured toward his car. Brandon looked toward the house one last time, but Suzanne had stepped away from the window. She didn't want to give him even that much. The female officer came to the door after Brandon had gotten in his car and driven away. "He's gone, ma'am. We've advised him that if he returns or attempts to contact you again, you can file for a restraining order. Would you like to file a report now?" "Not unless he comes back," Suzanne said. "I just want him to leave me alone." "Understood. You have our card. Call us immediately if he shows up again." He didn't come back to the house, but the messages continued for another week, each one more desperate than the last, coming from new phone numbers she blocked as fast as they appeared. "Please, Suzanne, I'm begging you. I can't live without you. Everything good in my life was because of you. I'll do anything to make this right." She blocked each new number without reading past the opening words. Eventually, after about 10 days, they stopped coming. Either he'd run out of ways to contact her, or he'd finally accepted that she meant what she said. In mid-October, Suzanne ran into Michael Randall. Not literally. They'd never actually met in person. But he sent her a message through social media, brief and respectful. "I wanted you to know that my divorce from Christy is final as of yesterday. I got custody of the kids and the house. I also wanted to say thank you for not sending me those investigation reports last year. A friend told me you had them, but chose not to. That took strength. I hope you're doing well." Suzanne read the message twice, considered responding, then decided to let it be. She'd made her choices. He'd made his. Their paths had intersected briefly through shared devastation, but they didn't need to stay connected. She wished him well in her thoughts, and left the message unanswered. Late October brought an interesting conversation at work. Suzanne was in a strategy meeting when her boss dropped unexpected news. "We're opening a satellite office in Seattle next year. We'll need someone to head up the marketing division there. Significant promotion, relocation package, ground floor opportunity to build a team from scratch." His eyes landed on Suzanne. "I think you'd be perfect for it, if you're interested. Seattle, 3,000 miles away. A completely fresh start in a city she'd never lived in. New team, new challenges, new everything." The old Suzanne would have said no immediately. Too risky, too far from home, too much change. But the woman she was becoming didn't say no. She said, "Can I think about it?" "Of course. No rush. We're looking at a summer launch, so you've got time to decide." Suzanne thought about it for weeks, talked it through in therapy, made lists of pros and cons, lay awake at night imagining what it would mean to leave the house her parents built, the city where she'd lived her entire life, everything familiar, but also what it would mean to start completely fresh. No memories on every corner. No risk of running into Brandon or Christy or anyone connected to that chapter of her life. Just Suzanne in a new city, building a new life, becoming whoever she wanted to be without the weight of who she used to be. She hadn't decided yet, but she was considering it. That alone felt like growth. November came with shorter days and colder nights. Suzanne found herself spending more time at home, but it felt different now. The house had been transformed over the past year. She'd repainted the living room, replaced old furniture with pieces she'd chosen herself, hung new artwork, some of her mother's paintings, some pieces she'd bought at local galleries, one abstract piece that reminded her of the San Francisco sunset. The house was becoming hers. Not her parents' house that she was maintaining, not the house she'd shared with Brandon, just hers. A sanctuary she'd built through intentional choices about colors and furniture and which memories to keep and which to let go. One evening in mid-November, her phone rang. Another unknown number. She almost didn't answer, expecting it to be Brandon with a new phone. But curiosity won. "Hello? Suzanne Hurst?" A woman's voice, tentative. "My name is Jennifer Collins. I was a friend of Brandon's. I'm calling because I think you should know something." Suzanne felt her stomach tighten but kept her voice neutral. "I'm not interested in anything about Brandon. I understand. But please, just listen for 1 minute." Jennifer's words came quickly. "He's not doing well. He's drinking heavily. Lost another job. Got evicted last month. He's been couch surfing, but he's wearing out his welcome everywhere. And he talks about you constantly. About how you ruined his life by not taking him back." "I ruined his life?" Suzanne's voice was sharp. I know the real story. That he cheated. That he left you. That he destroyed his own life. But he's not seeing it that way. He's becoming unstable. He showed up at my place last night drunk and angry, ranting about you. I wanted to warn you to be careful. Is he threatening me? Not directly, but the energy isn't good. I think you should consider a restraining order." They talked for a few more minutes. Jennifer gave specific dates and times of concerning behavior. Enough for a police report if Suzanne wanted to file one. After they hung up, Suzanne sat in the quiet of her living room and thought carefully. She wasn't afraid exactly, but she wasn't foolish either. Brandon had already shown up at her house once. He'd been contacting her obsessively. Now he was apparently blaming her for consequences he'd brought on himself, mixing alcohol with resentment. Better to have legal protection in place than to wait until she needed it urgently. The next morning, she drove to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order, provided documentation of his repeated contact attempts, his appearance at her house, Jennifer's warning. Within a week, a temporary order was in place. Brandon was legally required to stay at least 500 feet from her home, and her workplace. Violation would mean immediate arrest. The order was served to him at the address Jennifer had provided. Suzanne didn't know how he reacted, didn't care. She'd done what she needed to do to protect her peace and her safety. December arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of the worst night of her life. 1 year since Brandon had sat in her living room and asked for a divorce. 1 year since her world had exploded and she'd been forced to rebuild from wreckage. Suzanne thought about the woman from a year ago, the one who'd slid down the wall and cried until there were no tears left, the one who'd spent weeks in fog and confusion, the one who'd almost sent those envelopes, almost chosen revenge over healing. She barely recognized that woman now. The person she'd become was different, harder in some ways, but also softer in others, less willing to accept crumbs of affection, more willing to demand respect, less afraid of being alone, more aware of her own worth. On December 5th, the actual anniversary, Suzanne did something she'd been planning for weeks. She went to the master bedroom closet and pulled out her wedding dress, preserved in its garment bag all these years. She'd kept it thinking maybe someday she'd pass it down to a daughter, or at least keep it as a memory of a happy day. She unzipped the bag and looked at the dress. White silk and lace, beautifully made, worn by a woman who'd believed in forever. That woman had been naive, yes, but she'd also been hopeful, full of love and trust and faith in the promises being made. Suzanne didn't regret being that woman. She regretted that Brandon hadn't been worthy of her. That was his failure, not hers. She folded the dress carefully, placed it back in the bag, and drove to a donation center. Gave it to a volunteer who promised it would go to a bride who couldn't afford a new dress. Someone else can have the dream, Suzanne said softly. I have different dreams now. When she got home, she walked straight to her home office, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, pulled out the manila envelope she'd locked away almost a year ago. The investigative report, the photos, the messages, all the evidence she'd kept in reserve. The revenge she'd chosen not to take. She held it for a long moment. Then she walked to the fireplace she rarely used, knelt down, and built a small fire. When the flames were steady, she fed the envelope into them, watched the paper catch and curl and blacken, watched the photos dissolve into ash, watched a year's worth of held possibility disappear into smoke. She didn't need it anymore. Didn't need the insurance policy or the proof of her choice. Didn't need to carry it forward into whatever came next. It was time to let it go completely. That evening, Bethany came over with Chinese takeout and wine. They sat in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Suzanne had sat 1 year ago, devastated and lost. Eating directly from the containers, talking about everything and nothing. 1 year ago today, Bethany said quietly, "How are you feeling?" Suzanne thought about it honestly. Grateful, which is weird to say about the worst day of my life, but I'm grateful it happened. Not because I wanted to go through it, but because I'm better now than I was then. Stronger, more myself. If he hadn't left, I'd still be in a dead marriage with someone who didn't really love me. At least now I have a chance at something real. Are you thinking about dating? Maybe someday. But right now, I'm enjoying being alone, learning who I am without someone else defining it. Suzanne took a sip of wine. For the first time in my adult life, I'm completely on my own. And it's not scary anymore. It's actually kind of beautiful. After Bethany left, Suzanne poured herself one more small glass of wine and went out to the backyard despite the cold. The roses were dormant now, bare branches waiting for spring. But she could see where they'd bloom again when the weather warmed. Pink and red and white, faithful and reliable. Everything had seasons. Death and dormancy and resurrection. She'd been dormant for a while, frozen in grief. But now she was growing again. Slowly, steadily, reaching toward light. Suzanne raised her glass to the dark sky. "Thank you," she whispered to her parents, hoping they could hear somehow. "Thank you for this house, for the foundation you gave me, for teaching me about dignity and strength. I'm okay. I'm going to be more than okay." The night was quiet except for distant traffic and wind through bare branches. She stood there for a long time, breathing cold air, feeling more present in her own life than she'd felt in years. When she finally went back inside, she locked the door and turned on the lights. The house glowed warm and welcoming around her. Hers, completely hers, filled with memories of people who'd loved her unconditionally, empty of the person who'd loved her conditionally. Before bed, she made one final decision. She pulled out her laptop and composed an email to her boss. "I've been thinking about the Seattle opportunity. I'd like to throw my hat in the ring. Let's schedule a time to discuss details." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. New city, new role, new chapter. Why not? What was the worst that could happen? She'd already survived the worst. Everything else was just living. Suzanne climbed the stairs to her bedroom, changed into comfortable pajamas, and got into bed. Her bed, in her room, in her house, in her life. A life that was smaller than she'd planned, but more authentic, more solid. Built on truth instead of lies. She turned off the light and settled into darkness. Outside, the world continued on. Brandon was somewhere dealing with consequences. Christy was somewhere doing the same. Their lives had intersected with hers, had caused tremendous damage, and had moved on. But Suzanne had moved on too, in a different direction, toward something better, toward herself. She fell asleep easily that night. No tears, no nightmares, no wondering what might have been. Just peaceful rest in the house her parents built, in the life she was rebuilding, in the future that was still unwritten, but completely, entirely hers. And in the morning, when winter sunlight streamed through the windows and woke her gently, Suzanne Hurst opened her eyes to a new day, with something she'd thought she'd lost forever. That terrible December night, 1 year ago. Hope, dignity, peace. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd flourished. And whatever came next, whether it was Seattle or staying here, new love or continued solitude, she knew with absolute certainty she'd face it with her head high and her heart whole. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all, the truest revenge wasn't destruction. It was living well. It was choosing to heal instead of harm. It was walking away from toxicity and building something beautiful in its place. Suzanne got out of bed, stretched, and caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd stood there a year ago. Older, yes, but also wiser, stronger, free. She smiled at her reflection. Not a small, hesitant smile. A real one. Full and genuine. That woman was ready for whatever came next. And whatever came next would be lucky to have her. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.